Hello there, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to our special coverage of the Russia-Ukraine file. 1 month after Russia launched its special military operation, the Russian army has failed to execute a swift takeover of its neighbor and install a pro-Kremlin puppet government in the capital, Kiev, according to analysts. The Russian plan to surround key cities with rapidly inserted airborne forces and ground troops driving along major roads relied on the assumption that Ukrainian resistance would be chaotic and light. These questions and more will be discussed with our panel of guests. We have Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas, political analyst and international expert from Donbass, and Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, economic expert and associate professor at Yıldemir Bayezid University from Ankara. Thank you for both guests for joining us. The discussion begins right after this break. And before we delve into discussion, an extraordinary meeting of NATO took place in Brussels. Joe Biden, attending his first NATO summit since the beginning of the conflict in Ukraine, promised Ukraine with more help. The alliance aims to strengthen its defensive system at its closest borders to Ukraine.
As the conflict in Ukraine enters its second month, NATO, G7, and EU leaders met in Brussels in a show of unity between Western leaders.
NATO has never been more united than it is today.
On the table, assisting Ukraine and reinforcing NATO territories were the main goals. The alliance aims to reinforce its defense in the east and to assist Ukraine with military equipment.
And allies are deploying additional chemical and biological and nuclear defenses to reinforce our existing and new battle groups.
In the summit, British Prime Minister Boris Johnson warned that the consequences would be catastrophic for Russian President Vladimir Putin if chemical weapons were used in Ukraine.
I think that if Putin were to engage in anything like that, the consequences would be very severe.
US President Joe Biden said his country will help Ukraine with the $1 billion of humanitarian aid. Joe Biden also announced new tougher sanctions will be imposed on Russia.
We're also announcing new sanctions of more than 400 individuals and entities in alignment with the European Union. More than 300 members of the Duma, oligarchs, and Russian defense companies that fuel the Russian war machine.
China was also on the side of the alliance. The Western alliance accused Beijing of helping Moscow politically. China didn't take too long to deny such accusations.
Accusing China of spreading false information about Ukraine is disinformation in itself. China has always made positive efforts to establish a ceasefire and end the war as soon as possible, to avoid a humanitarian crisis and to restore peace and stability in an objective and equitable manner.
This is the third NATO summit since the conflict in Ukraine began. NATO tries to find a breakthrough to the ongoing crisis and to defend its territories and to avoid an escalation of the conflict to other European countries.
So let me begin with you, Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas. What are we expecting as outcome from this summit, knowing that similar summits have been held and sanctions didn't change President Putin's mind regarding what he calls a special military operation? How is this summit going to be any different?
Yes, you're right. The sanctions really did not change at the moment, the behavior of President Putin. First of all, I have to say that I'm a Lithuanian political analyst from Mykolos Romeris Invest in Vilnius. And as a political analyst of Lithuania, I am involved with Donbass in cooperation with Ukrainian NGO Donbass Gates, which is registered in Mariupol. So, but looking answering to your question about NATO, this summit, and President Biden's speech. So I think it's really more important, the summit, not regarding what Putin is doing in Ukraine, rather than what NATO could do in the eastern flank. strengthening eastern flank, because were two possible responses from NATO. One of them regarding Ukraine, and another one regarding the NATO eastern flank. So regarding eastern flank, I think really NATO is going in a very right direction. NATO woke up after Putin started this total war in Ukraine, because the hybrid warfare, was going on in Donbass for the last 8 years. But regarding Ukraine, I think one of the most important steps will be done if Western countries will decide it, to have embargo on using oil and gas and purchasing oil and gas from Russia. That will be one of the strongest blow to Russia, to President Putin. For the time being, Western countries are on the consideration of such a possible thing. But I was urging even since last April, spring, to introduce this Iranian-style sanctions, because the President the President Putin and his people already last April used the language which until now used only such countries like Iran and North Korea. Mr. Kozak, who is a deputy head of the President administration under President Putin, said that Ukraine might be annihilated as a country. So this language was used only by Iran towards Israel, or North Korea towards South Korea. And Iranian sanctions were introduced because of that. So why not against Ukraine? That is still the question in the air.
Dr. Rajab Yorulma, since economy is your field of specialty, we have noticed recently that President Putin used energy card to lessen the severity on the Russian ruble, which rose in value immediately after he made the announcement that his country won't take any other currency other than the ruble in exchange of its energy products to Western nations. How effective is this measure, and how long is Russia able to resist these sanctions?
Okay, we should start maybe with the effectiveness of the sanctions in the first place. We can say this effectiveness of the sanctions increased, especially with the specific sanctions on the central bank of Russia. So it might lead us to your question, specific question, that does the Putin's new policy would work after all? But we might give some preliminary information beforehand to understand better, so to make a better understanding of the case. This Russian central banks has the reserves of $640 billion at last. This amount, actually almost $400 billion, just was held in the Western central banks, because they were handling this amount of reserves in their hands. And also 23% of the Russian reserves in central banks was staying as the gold. So what I'm trying to say here, what I'm trying to express here, Russia's economic power is no longer be capable of to sustain such a war. So such a strategy, also energy card, of course, is a great advantage. It brings a great advantage to the Russian economy and the Russian side. But under these circumstances that I already expressed, just would make it a bit more difficult for Russia to pursue such a policy tool, because they will no longer have power, I mean, in financial power to pursue such a war, because they will have at least $240 billion in reserves, in total reserves in their central bank. And this war costs $20 billion per day for them. So in order to finance such a war, and with those reserves and with those financial power, Russia has no such advantage to use its currency card to sell its energy resources to other countries, as far as I believe. And of course, we need to also discuss the impacts of those sanctions, because also the Western powers use the SWIFT card against Russia. And the SWIFT card is not much influential as much as the central bank sanctions on Russia, because SWIFT system is just a messaging system, and Russia is working with China over solving such a situation, as they kind of created the card of the policy of using their own currencies in the energy transactions, energy trade between other countries. But the central bank sanctions, as I explained, kind of hit hard to the Russian economy, and it made them very vulnerable, too much vulnerable to other external sources during the war. If we come up to your question again, I don't believe that this nation currency policy to sell such national resource products to other countries will not work or will not be sustainable at all.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. On a similar note, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelinsky urged NATO to provide Kiev with unrestricted military aid a month after Russia's special military operation in Ukraine. He warned that Russia's special operation will not stop in Ukraine. Let's take a listen.
On February 24, I came to you with a perfectly clear and logical request to help close our skies in any format, protect our people from Russian bombs and missiles. We heard no response. Ukraine does not have powerful anti-missile weapons and has a much smaller fleet of aircrafts than Russia. Therefore, their advantage in the sky is similar to using weapons of massive destruction. You have at least 20,000 tanks. Ukraine has asked that 1% of all your tanks be given to us or sold. But we did not have a clear answer yet. The worst thing in war is not having clear answers to requests for help.
Back to you, Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas. Despite detailed advance warnings of Vladimir Putin's plans for a major war in Ukraine, many observers remained in denial until the very last minute over the possibility of a full-scale Russian invasion. With the war now entering its second month, the sense of disbelief lingers on and is now preventing the international community from grasping the full gravity of the situation in Ukraine. It seems that Putin will settle for nothing less than the complete subjugation of Ukraine, according to experts. What's your take on this?
Well, first of all, I have to say that I predicted this kind of possible total war, and also this shelling not by artillery, but also using aviation of Russia's bombardment of the cities, and also using the rockets. And this is my understanding came up from Russia's activity in Syria, and before that, Putin's activity in Chechen Republic in Grozny. For Putin, people life does not matter. And one of the way of the, let's say, to break resistance of the people who oppose him is destroy the cities, like this destruction of half of Aleppo in Syria, some other also places, and like full destruction of the Chechen capital, Grozny, and so on. So this is, to my understanding, one of the biggest problems. Probably the President Zelensky is right when he's talking about this, that Ukrainian, one of the biggest problems is really not so much modern weaponry as Putin and Russian army has. And of course, one of the possible way to avoid such tragedy, for example, in Mariupol, in Donbass, that's the major seaport of the Azov Sea, to avoid such destruction of these cities on the similar way like it was destruction of Stalingrad during the Second World War, or Aleppo during the Russian war in Syria, was for the Ukrainians to have real good weapons to shoot down the, let's say, planes aviation or the rockets which are flying over the city. Well, if you're looking now to the really now 1 month past, this is the start of this total war by Putin. Yes, it's quite clearly, and for me also quite clearly, that Putin will not stop. And Putin, it's interesting, Putin does not count even the lives of Russian soldiers. And that is really the even different situation with what the Soviet administration did Afghanistan, when the losing of the lives of the Soviet soldiers were the strong blow to the Soviet regime at that time. But now I think a real, some danger and threat for the Putin's regime and for Putin's actions in Ukraine, that's Ukrainian people and Ukrainian military. And Ukraine really did something what really not just Russia, not just Putin, but also Western countries did not expect. Some of the countries were thinking when the total war started, it will be 2-3 days or 1 week until the Putin will capture, not just Kiev, but also, other major cities in Ukraine, when Putin surround and destroy Ukrainian army and so on. But one after that, we could say that Putin did not achieve still major gains. Putin did not get any major city. Also, some of them it's very badly damaged, like Kharkiv, for example, in the north of Ukraine, and certainly Mariupol. Putin maybe could say that he has this now corridor from Crimea to Donbass, but such things happen that I myself spent the last month in the Russian-occupied city of Ukraine, Berdansk, which is the second major city of Azov Sea, and just escaped on Monday this week. So I could say that Russia also occupied this territory, but still they do not have the full control of the city because the people do not want to obey to the occupied power. So therefore, yes, it might be some kind of stalemate between the Putin's ambitions to conquer Ukraine and to introduce his Russian world policy, this kind of Putinism in Ukraine, and Ukrainian resistance not to accept that. And that really might bring additional force both in Moscow and Western countries, what the situation in Ukraine might develop in the future.
Very nice indeed. Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, while Western politicians and commentators continue to discuss off-ramps and compromise settlements, few in Moscow are under any of such illusions. Those close to Putin understand that the current conflict as a holy war and has long since passed the point of no return. What would be the consequences if this dilemma continues, either on the two countries, Russia and Ukraine, the European continent, or even globally?
All right. In the first place, we need to analyze this in terms of the international political economy perspectives. So these perspectives shows us if the war continues or even spread to other countries, other regions, it will be a global mess. It will create a global mess. We need to understand this. I can explain this under 4 headings. I already explained the impacts of banking sector of Russia by explaining the central banks, sanctions on central banks and how it affected the Russian economy. But on the other hand, this process would also directly impact other countries in the global manner. The closed borders, like closed countries like Turkey in the first place, and the Middle Eastern countries, we can even mention this Egypt, Morocco in the first place is mostly dependent on the food import from those countries, especially from Ukraine and Russia. And also, of course, European countries will be affected much by this mess. And the second heading would be energy sector. The energy dependency of the Europe will be more detrimental for their economies entirely. If we come up the recent years, for example, Germany just shut down their nuclear bases in terms of electricity production, nuclear power plants. This year, they have a total of 6 nuclear power plants, and 3 of them were already closed, and the rest of the 3 will be closed, will be shut down at the end of this year. So this will make more dependent. This will make these countries more dependent on the Russian energy supply. So under this case, and also we can maybe mention about the Europe's climate change, also the climate change goals that they kind of trying to transform the energy production into more renewable energy sectors, which will take time and which will make them more vulnerable to the such energy dependency against Russia. So another headline would be the food crisis, the food shortages. Since Ukraine and Ukraine and Russia are the sources of grain and wheat and more agricultural productions for the entire world, for the Middle Eastern countries, for even Turkey, one way, even the European countries. This will create another mess for those countries and bring another burden on their economies. We already started to witness such impacts in the countries in the region. For example, in Egypt right now, the food prices already increased 50%, and the inflation already triggered by this. And even the bread prices just increased 50% in that country. And the national currency is already affected by this. And another important factor is the widely used metals that Russia and Ukraine producers they are counted as the highest, kind of the largest producers of such precious metals in the world, like palladium, aluminium, nickel, and other important aspects of such production would directly impact the global production, and it will directly impact and distort the global the production chain in the first place. For example, we might give examples of the aluminium. For example, Russia accounts for the 13% of the world's aluminium production. And as you know, all these precious metals, aluminium, nickel, palladium, they are all source of major manufacturing goods outputs and major manufacturing goods that directly impact the entire global economy. For example, automobile sector, manufacturing sector, and also some special gases like neon, for example. The neon gas is pretty much important to produce chips. These chips is kind of used for the automobile sector and also computer electronic production. Sure. As we already witnessed such a situation, such a crisis during the COVID pandemic, we will kind of see another next crisis in terms of such production goods, and it will directly affect the prices in the entire global market, especially it will start with the data shows us, it will start in the automobile sector. So finally, eventually we can say, if the conflict between those countries continue as it seems so, because Putin is not behaving like more like a kind of a clear mind, using the clear mind, it will be kind of create total mess for the entire global economy.
Very nice indeed. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky addresses the European Union, saying the sanctions came a bit late and that Russia is using phosphorus bombs. Zelensky added that women are raped, houses are looted, they destroy churches, all churches.
You have applied sanctions. We're grateful to you. These are strong measures, but it's a bit late, because if they had been preventive, Russia would not have entered the war. No one knows for sure. There was a chance.
Back to you, Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas. Can Putin be stopped? As some experts say, when Putin says that there is no Ukrainian nation and no Ukrainian state, he means that he intends to destroy the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian state. How true is that, Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas?
Well, this Putin statement looked for me very dangerous and threatening, not just towards Ukraine, but also European security in general. Because whatever example, of course, we cannot look to the historical examples and to put it nowadays situation. But one of the famous person who was talking about the fact that there is no Austrian nation and Austria is artificial state was Adolf Hitler. And with his view on Austria, and we remember how things were developing following the Czechoslovakia, dismemberment of Czechoslovakia, and Sudet annexation, after Anschluss of Austria, and then attack against Poland. So now Putin simply repeat what Hitler was saying, but now he's saying against Ukraine. So to my understanding, when some politicians are saying that another country have no right to exist, So all other countries have to understand that this is not a problem of bilateral relations of this politician with another country, but this is a problem of really the bigger problem, and now European security problem. So when looking what we are discussing also now about economical implications, and again, not just for Russia and not just for Ukraine, and not just for Europe, as you said, also for the Egypt and for the other countries, to my understanding, we have to understand one thing. We have situation with the problem of one man who decided to start total war against another country because he believes this country does not have a right to exist and there is no such nation as Ukraine. And then the consequences of this war could be global for many, many other countries. So to my understanding, it's really a time for the other countries, not just Western countries, but also for such countries like China, India, and others, Turkey, to actively come up to those discussions and to try to talk to this one person that he is really destroying the economical future of in the global way. And if other countries will understand that very clearly, to my understanding, Ukraine and also this issue of the country sovereignty of Ukraine will have much more stronger position. Now it's empowered by the Ukrainian army, what Ukrainian nation is doing, really Ukrainian people is doing. It's really some kind of very strong resistance towards that one. But of course, only one nation, one country, and the implications are global. So to my understanding, really, it's time to start up to think about the consequences of this war globally, and also how other countries, including, first of all, China, have to think maybe twice about this and what I'm saying. Maybe India, maybe Arab countries too, that if you will not stop Putin in this war, if you're not forced to accept Ukrainian sovereignty as a fact that Ukraine have a right to exist, Ukrainian nation have a right to exist, it's really a global implication threatening the whole stability in the whole world, not only in this part of Europe.
Thank you for these explanations. Indeed, Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, in order to stop Putin, he must be defeated, according to experts. Anything less will merely create a temporary pause before the next attempt to destroy Ukraine. For the international community, this means declaring total economic war on Russia while dramatically increasing arms deliveries to Ukraine. If this is true, how would the economic war be launched, and what can the world community do more to stop Putin? Can Russia's economy resist? Are there any other cards that Putin might be concealing for such case scenario?
First of all, we need to understand that the total economic war is not possible against Russia. Of course, it is possible, but the achievement of such a policy tool is crucial. As I explained already, these all economic ties are bound with each other. And many countries in Europe, since the energy dependency of the European countries to the Russia gives us that hint, such a war will not also we cannot find such kind of countries to willingly join such a cause. For example, Germany. Once Germany almost more than 50% of dependency on the energy sector to Russia, how can you expect such countries to join such a willingness cause against Russia? Of course, we all believe that, and this must be stopped. This single guy must be stopped. But using the economic tools, it seems it will be a bit crucial and a bit difficult. But of course, specific tools like directly sanctions on central bank would work a bit. But again, on the other hand, Russia has its own power of natural resources against such countries to use, and also they have the natural resources, and as I explained, the precious metals, for example, which directly affect the automobile sector in the entire global economy. We already, for example, speaking in Turkish economy, under the view of Turkish economy, we already witnessed too much sacrifices of automobile sector and increasing the prices and inflation, increasing the inflation, general price levels in the country. would affect the entire people in the country, entire society, and it will entirely affect, and this effect will be bigger in the region and in the countries, in the European countries as well. So we might think clearly here, and what I believe is a domestic pressure from Russia maybe would work. I'm not an expert of international relations or the political scientist, but maybe a domestic pressure would work inside Russia, because also Russian economy would be affected much from this from this war in the mid and long term. Even right now, even the short term, we do witness such economic effects of the crisis of the war in the Russian economy, in the domestic market of Russia. But of course, the Putin's power in Russia maybe might not give them any chance, give such a policy any chance, such a strategy to any chance. But the total economic war, as far as I see, it's not possible.
It's not likely. Thank you, Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz. Let me share with you this information. A Polish Prime Minister has called for imposing sanctions on Russian fossil fuels and barring Russian ships from European ports because Russia is committing a massacre in Ukraine. Mateusz made the call on Thursday night, and as concerns grew over Russia's conflict of its special military operation in Ukraine. Back to you, Dr. Alvydas Medalinskas. International sanctions imposed since the start of the war have been in many ways unprecedented, but they remain insufficient. It is vital to understand that Putin is prepared to suffer considerable economic pain in order to achieve his historic goal of crushing Ukraine, according to some experts. Rather than seeking to deter the Kremlin, Poland is apparently seeking to completely cut the country off from the global economy and deprive Russia from any revenues. Is Poland afraid of further escalation that would get it directly involved with the Ukraine-Russia armed conflict or war?
Well, we could understand the Polish view and the Polish Prime Minister view because Poland's a neighboring country to Ukraine, and the country in the region, which sometimes when you hear the Russian politicians or political analysts, experts, who sometimes threatening even that Poland might be under attack if Putin would decide to test waters with NATO. Will NATO Article 5 works to defend the country which is part of NATO and the EU? But of course, I mean the Poland and maybe other countries and the politicians of those leaders of those countries are fully right when we're talking about this. That yes, the sanctions still does not work. I again could repeat it. I fully support the view, and that's my view also, that the sanctions have to be introduced earlier, because when the sanctions could produce real results only after 1 year, 2 years, or 3 years. So if really the sanctions would be introduced at least a year ago, the effect would be much more high. But when I was talking about this, the fact about the global implications of this Putin desire to crush Ukraine, and of course Ukraine resistance, because Ukraine does not want to be crushed by Putin's by a Russian army. I kept in mind also the fact that, for example, who could save Russian economy, or who could try to save Russian economy when the Russian economy began to feel the very big pain because of this quite serious sanctions.
Yes. But apparently Russia is not the only one who is going to suffer the consequences, as Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz also mentioned earlier. Back to you, Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz. Western leaders will need to accept that their own countries must also pay a significant price, right? German Chancellor Olaf Scholz has warned that a ban on Russian energy imports would mean a European recession. He must urgently wake up to the fact that the alternative is a European genocide as well. What would be the recession like, Doctor?
First of all, especially the German side, in terms of the German side, the kind of assessments of those sides will not be trustable for us. We've already seen this hypocrisy so far. I don't want to say this, but unfortunately, as they are already bounded economically and financially to Russia, and of course they are at least aware of the situation, that they are they need to sacrifice and they need to share the burden on the conflict. But as I say, it's not convincible. Such assessments, such statements from them is not convincible for the international or global arena. As we see the refugee case over the issue of the Russian invasion over Ukraine, as they treat these even the refugees separately, as we witnessed their behaviors against the refugees from Syria and the other countries as well. We did see this kind of a hypocrisy. That's why, as a perspective, maybe it's because it's kind of a Turkish perspective, maybe, but as we can see here, as under the point of view of us, we do see this situation as these statements not trustable and not kind of convincible for both of us, both of countries or all countries in the region, especially in the Middle Eastern countries. If we come back to the topic, the European nations, European countries should act collaboratively in the first place if they can be able to achieve this. And they need to burden the sacrifice and they need to share the burden of by sacrificing the kind of some economic situations of their reserves or their countries or their...
Speaking of sacrifices, Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, let me share with you what's happening right now on the ground. According to the governor of Kharkiv, at least 6 civilians were killed and 15 injured on Thursday in a Russian bombing which carried out long-range weapons. Let's follow this report for more insight.
At least 6 civilians were killed and 15 injured on Thursday in a Russian bombing of the Ukrainian city of Kharkiv. The governor of Kharkiv declared,
according to a preliminary report, 6 civilians were killed and 15 were injured and hospitalized.
The bombing carried out with long-range weapons hit a post office in the district of which local residents were receiving humanitarian aid. Kharkiv, the second city in the country with almost 1.5 million inhabitants before the Russian military operation, is located about 14 kilometers from the Russian border. The city has been the target of Russian bombardments that have destroyed nearly 1,000 buildings, most of them residential properties. Earlier, the government of Vladimir Putin assured that military forces has taken control of the city of Izium, located in the Kharkiv region. Russian news agency reported that Russian Defense Ministry spokesman Igor Konashenkov declared,
the Russian armed forces continue to carry out their tasks in the special military operation. We have completely taken control of the city of Izium.
The Russian army attacked several Ukrainian military targets with long-range missiles on Wednesday afternoon and night, causing the destruction of 13 rocket launchers in the city of Danilovka, located south of the capital, Kiev.
Since we're running out of time, I might give 30 seconds for each guest to answer this particular question. In recent years, claims of genocide have lost much of their potency due to frequent political exploitation, not least by Putin himself in the run-up to the current war. Nevertheless, it remains the most serious accusation that can be leveled at any state. What can we say in the case of Putin's war against Ukraine? For both guests, 30 seconds for each.
Well, the civil infrastructure is targeted quite deliberately by Russian army. And it's not only the buildings, where the buildings, of course, when the war is going on inside the city, so of course some buildings might be destructed. But it's also what's important to say, civil infrastructure, the gas connection, electricity connections, the heating, and so on and so on and so on. Because when the people do not get all this, and we do not have a food, do not have a medicine and whatever, Putin accepts things that when those people might be subdued more easily. The fact is that the people resisting to this one brings desire from Russian army to introduce more and more brutal warfare against Ukrainian people in Ukraine. And that is not strange that more and more discussions are coming up about war criminal
Thank you, Dr.
against President Putin and his regime.
Yes, final word for Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, please. 30 seconds.
Thank you. The final word must be, according to me and according to all people in the world, to remember and to remind the entire world people the previous crimes of Russia, not just the Ukraine. not just over Ukraine. They are now committing war crimes against civilians in Ukraine, it's obviously, but it's not the first time for them. We forget what they did and what they are still doing in Syria right now. Turkey just hosting almost 7 million refugees of Syrian refugees in its borders. So it's almost 2 million people from Ukraine and the whole world now focusing their attention, giving their attention to this case. And what I'm trying to say here, what I'm trying to remind people that we need to also just see the other crimes of Russia, not just Ukraine.
Point clear. Dr. Rajab Yorulmaz, thank you so much for both guests for joining us live here from Algiers on All 24 News. Thank you, dear viewers, for keeping it here on All 24 News with me, Karim Fazakri. That's the end of our special coverage. To the next time.